I've always been self-confident. Everyone thinks they can be a superstar until they're 7, 8, 9 years old. And then people start beating you down. I've faced plenty of obstacles and overcome incredible adversity, but I've never thought I couldn't do it. Part of that is my earlier success. I never did spend any time on what if. It's a waste of time. So I'm always looking at the future. I'm always looking for the path, goals that I'm after. My job as a franchisor is to give the franchisee the best system, the best recipe in the industry. If you have enthusiasm for what you're doing, you're going to do it far better than if you have a hate of what you're doing. You have to do the right thing. You're never going to be appreciated 100%.
Have you ever heard of Jackson Hewitt or Liberty Tax? Now, if you're human and live on planet Earth, then the odds are that you have. Jackson Hewitt grew to over 6,000 locations at one point, and Liberty Tax over 4,000 locations. And then in this episode, I sit down with the founder of those brands, John Hewitt. In 1997, he sold Jackson Hewitt, forget this, over $480 million. And just a year later, he founded Liberty Tax and built that to a multi-$100 million company as well. Now, one of my questions was, well, didn't you have a non-compete after you sold it? And you got to hear about how he circumvented that and was able to still go ahead and start building another tax brand. It's pretty genius. Now, he's won some of the most prestigious entrepreneurial awards like the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. And John and I's conversation was simple, but really profound. What does it take to win and be successful in business? We talked about John's confidence level and how to build mental toughness. We also unpacked some of his strategic moves that he made that were some of the secrets of really his company's explosive growth and success. Now, guerrilla marketing was an area that he mastered, and we chatted specifics about how he used guerrilla marketing to grow his brands and how you can use it too. Then we talked about a really dark period in his life when he was ousted as the CEO of Liberty Tax by his board, which eventually led to them declaring bankruptcy years later. Now, this is a watch until the end of the episode with a legend, and not just franchising, but in business. Now, if you want to buy a franchise in the next 12 months, you should check out my free franchise masterclass at franchiseempire.com. And if you want to work with me and my team on finding or buying a franchise or resale business, then you can go to franchiseempire.com/check territory, and you can schedule a free call to see what's available in the area. The link is also in the description below. With that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode. You know, you founded two of the largest tax franchises in the United States. I was reading that one sold for over $480 million back in 1997. And so I can't be the first person to wonder and think and ask you, what keeps driving you to work? Like you don't need to work, right?
Yeah, the second one also became a $500 million company. So, when I was a kid, I was cocky. I grew up poor, but when I was in high school, I knew I was going to get rich. I didn't know how, but I knew I was going to get rich. And my plan was just to make a few $1 million and retire and enjoy life. And then I realized the treasure at the end of the rainbow is anticlimactic. The journey is the joy. And I've brought in 5,200 franchisees who had hundreds of and thousands of employees. And I've changed tens of thousands of people's lives. And that drives me every day to change lives, improve the world.
You said as a kid that you grew up poor.
Yes. But
you knew that you were going to be rich one day.
Right.
And make a lot of money. How did you know that? Where did that come from, stem from? What gave you that confidence to know that that would happen?
You know, I'm not positive, but I had about 25 years ago, I ran into a friend that I hadn't seen since college in 25 years. So, and I said to him, if you could remember what was the number one thing you remember most about me? And he said, you're the most confident person I ever met. So I've always been self-confident. I've always, I guess, Tariq, it comes down to this. Let me say it this way, that I was reading or listening to a radio broadcast by Kathy Lee a few years ago, and she had written a book. And in the book, one of her chapters is The Age of Bliss. And she talks about that in life, everyone thinks they can be a superstar until they're 7, 8, 9 years old. You can be Superman, you could be Batman, you could be President of the United States, you could be anything. And then people start beating you down. Your parents, your friends, your enemies, they say, oh, you'll never be able to do that. And she said, she said, a lecture to adults, you guys need to get back to an age of bliss. And I realized when I heard her interview that was one of the way I'm different from other people. They never beat me down. I've lived an age of bliss where I thought I could do anything.
But did you ever have an obstacle early on that started to create doubt or uncertainty that will I really be able to make this happen? Or it's harder. I think some people have that confidence, but then they realize that it's harder than they thought. So did you ever have a moment like that?
Well, God doesn't put anyone here to escape. I've faced plenty of obstacles and overcome incredible adversity, taking pummeling and beating, and I was eviscerated, had lots of problems, but I've never, ever had any 24 hours go by where I thought I couldn't do it. When and I think maybe part of that is my earlier success, but I started as a great chess player when I was 9 years old. And so when chess, you're always thinking about, well, if they do that, I'll do that. And if they do that, I'll do that. And so I've always been blessed with great vision, and I've never been beaten down. When they beat me down, I always get back up.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm a firm believer that I used to travel the country and speak for Tony Robbins. And Tony would say that 80% of success in anything, whether it's business, health, family life, 80% of your success was mental and 20% was strategy. And his kind of supporting theory around that was, well, everyone knows the strategy. You can look up the strategy online pretty easily, right? It's the mental side. It's like, okay, if my strategy is to be in great shape, I already know I got to take in less calories that I burn. I got to go to the gym. But it's like in those moments of laziness, feeling tired, lack of discipline, what happens in those moments? So was there ever a time where you felt like your mental side of it was at a threat at all? I mean, you're saying you like after 20, like you went no longer than 24 hours, but I'm just trying to understand, like, what were you saying to yourself in those moments?
I'm under every adversity. I never spend any time on what if if I hadn't made that mistake, then what would happen? It's a waste of time. So I'm always looking at the future, and I'm the most forgiving person you ever meet, with employees and enemies and detractors. But I'm always looking for, this is where I am today. That's where I'm going to go. And thinking about different strategies. And if this happens, I do that. If that happens, I do this. I take this path. I'm always looking for the path to the goals that I'm after. And believe me, I've been beaten down. And in my book, I talk about some of them. I have a book that available to your listeners if you like it, that I'll send them one for free. But it's called I Compete. And I just love competition. And I give it my all. And again, they never discouraged me into stopping.
Now, you founded Jackson Hewitt, right?
Yes.
And then you went on to sell that in 1997. And then in 1998, you started Liberty Tax, right? And that was that the one where you acquired a Canadian? Which one was the one where you acquired a Canadian franchisor and then brought it to the U.S.?
That was Liberty Tax.
Liberty
We
Tax
acquired them and opened in January of 98.
98. Right. So my question when I read that, my first question was there not a non-compete in place or anything like that? Like, how did that process work?
Yeah, Jackson Hewitt was a public company, and they were in all 50 states, but they weren't in Canada. And I started working for H&R Block when I was at the University of Buffalo, and which is a stone's throw from Canada. So I had done Canadian tax returns. So they never occurred to them. And of course, I would have never agreed to a non-compete that covered a place where they didn't have any offices. So Jackson Hewitt wasn't in Canada. They've never gone to Canada. Liberty Tax is still a strong number 2 player, top 100 retail chain in Canada. And then after my non-compete ended in the U.S., then I came back in a big way in the U.S.
What a brilliant move. So talk about playing chess. Was that when did you know that you wanted to buy Liberty Tax or at least go into the Canadian market and kind of plan that strategically? Did you know that as you were finalizing the transaction afterwards and you thought, what's next? I've reached the milestone again. Now I need another journey to, really keep me busy.
Yeah, that's kind of exactly what happened. I was, when I left Jackson Hewitt, I took 4 of my top people with me. And so we didn't decide what we were going to do right away. I had a non-compete, so we couldn't do anything in the U.S. in any big way. We couldn't open within 25 miles of a Jackson Hewitt office. And they were everywhere, virtually. So,
and for how long? What was the period of the non-compete?
3 years.
3 years. 3
taxes. So we were looking for something to do, and we're looking to acquire a franchise. Going into a different. I'm cocky enough to believe I can manage another industry, and now that with loyalty brands, I've proven that. But what we thought we could go into any industry, and we wanted to be in franchising, so we were looking at different franchise opportunities. At the same time, in parallel, we looked at Canada and found that the second largest tax service in Canada, they were in disarray. They had gone into bankruptcy, and a very wealthy investor had bought them out of bankruptcy, and they really didn't want it. So in parallel, in looking in the U.S., we were negotiating with the Canadian failed franchise organization, and we were able to acquire that. And of course, that's my expertise. This is my 55th tax season. I fondly call myself the great granddaddy of tax. And I have 4 great grandchildren, so that has some validity.
It has some validity. That's funny. And given that you guys use that mascot there at Liberty Tax as a great marketing tool, I do want to talk about that in a little bit. But you could maybe you could find the great granddaddy mascot. I think that could be interesting. Could be like the Santa Claus of taxes.
Yeah, to me that would look sort of like a Colonel Sanders or Uncle Sam, something like that.
So let's that's the natural place to shift to, and then I want to talk about just franchisee success as a whole. But one of the things you guys were known for was that guerrilla marketing tactic for Liberty Tax and dressing up in the Statue of Liberty. Where did that idea come from? Who came up with that idea? Because that turned out to be one of the most successful ways that you guys attracted attention, right?
Yeah, exactly. When we first started Liberty Tax in 2000, because I had sold the public company, I was still kind of infamous or famous on Wall Street. So we go to Wall Street every year and talk to investors and keep my contacts alive. When I first started going out and talking about Liberty Tax, people said, Liberty, who's that? They heard of Jackson Hewitt, but they never heard of Liberty. Within about 3 or 4 years, every time I mentioned Liberty Tax, oh, you're the ones with the dancer in front. You're the one with the costume figure. And so, yeah, I read a book just before I left Jackson Hewitt called Guerrilla Marketing. And it was a great testament of why use guerrilla marketing and how effective it is. And actually, the cost per customer when you use guerrilla marketing is far less than when you use traditional TV or radio or back then newspaper or direct mail. Of course, there was no internet when that book was written in the early 90s. And the cost is much less expensive. And so I fell in love with guerrilla marketing just a year before the company was sold. And we invented little donut boxes that said Jackson Hewitt on it. And we would buy donuts, like 3 or I forget how many donuts it held, like 3 to 5, and we delivered them business to business at Jackson Hewitt. But we never had a Jackson Hewitt costume because what would that look like? I mean, it wouldn't be good to have a picture of me, right? So what was a Jackson Hewitt costume look like? So what happened, I've been blessed in so many ways, so many times. The way we invented the name Liberty Tax is we had, remember I left with 4 of my people, we had 100 names of all kinds of different companies. I couldn't use Hewitt anymore because of my non-compete and the agreement I had signed, but we were looking for a name and we couldn't find one. And then I was driving down West Sahara Boulevard in Las Vegas, and there's this 50-foot replica of the Statue of Liberty in front of this little Liberty shopping center. And I said to myself, wow, everyone within 10 miles of here has to know where this is. And I bet you parents are bringing their little children and taking their picture in front of the Statue of Liberty. I mean, you're in Vegas, right? And that's 3,000 miles from New York. They may never get to New York, but they're taking their picture. I said, everyone knows where this is. And there was, and there were stories like in the guerrilla marketing, like there's a big chicken used to be, I don't know, in Atlanta. I don't know. It was called the Big Chicken. And there was a store with this huge 50-foot chicken head on top of it. And so everyone knew where that was. And of course, I didn't invent costume characters. McDonald's had a Ronald McDonald's, and Burger King had a little king. Wendy's had a little red-haired wigged girl. Chick-fil-A still has a cow out on occasion. So I didn't invent it. But when we started Liberty, what an easy way to get brand name. You know, I had to go against, I've been competing against H&R Block for 41 years now. And they're a household name. Everyone know. I mean, if you say, tell me the largest tax services in the country, 90% of the people would say H&R Block. How many would say, back when we started Liberty Tax, could say Liberty? No one. So we said, we need to break in. You got to get brand name before you can get a customer make a buying decision, right? If they never heard of you, they're never going to come to you. So first thing you got to do is get brand name. And it's so easy. I mean, Tariq, how many businesses do you pass on the way to work each day? Most people pass by hundreds. And I say to them, how many can you remember? And they say 20 or 12 but if you saw a costume character dancing from January to April on the street, would that be one of the companies that you remember? And everyone unanimously says yes. And so when we started ATAX, my new company, we have an eagle costume. So we have eagle dancers with ATAX signs out in front of our location. And when you pass through America, there aren't typically national brands. There aren't 5 that have costume characters, and certainly not H&R Block or Jackson Hewitt.
Hey, so I recently put together a list of 5 low-cost franchises that make $1 million or more. If you want to see that list, then click the link below in the description or go to franchiseempire.com/low cost. Let's get back to the episode. Fascinating. Yeah, that's so interesting. And to me, it's part of the ingenuity of entrepreneurs. And sometimes the difference, what I've seen, the difference between big success is it can be a fine line sometimes, where it's just like, it's kind of that one thing. Now, granted, you were already successful in the tax space without a mascot, right? So it's not like someone could say, okay, if you didn't have the mascot, you weren't going to be successful, but to do it the second time around.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it doesn't. I mean, Chick-fil-A and Kentucky Fried Chicken both serve chicken, right? And they both have soda and fries and, all kinds of, or many similar products, but they're a little different. And just like McDonald's is different from Burger King and different from Wendy's. If David had worn the same shield and sword and armor that Goliath wore, there would be no David and Goliath story. He'd be the 189th guy killed by Goliath. So you have to have differentiators. If you're going to be spectacularly successful, you have to have differentiators. You can't replicate your competitor. And you're right. And I'm 95% of my companies. I've always had the fastest growing tax company, whether it was H&R Block or Jackson Hewitt or Liberty or now ATAX. I've always had the fastest growing, but 95% of the system is the same. It's the 5% differentiators that set us apart and make us the fastest growing.
Yeah, interesting. By the way, my name is pronounced Tariq.
Oh, Tariq! Wow.
Yeah.
Do you know others spelled the same way?
It's not common because mine stems from being an Arabic or Middle Eastern name, okay. And so a lot, like especially Egyptians, will spell it Tarek, or they'll spell it Tarik. A lot of the times when it's spelled the way mine is, they'll pronounce it Tariq, which has made for a very interesting 35 years of life so far.
Well, thanks for helping me. I usually ask, but this time I thought I had it.
No, it's all good. It's all good, man. So you just talked about the 5%, right? The 5% that makes it different. Given that you've worked with thousands of franchisees in your brands, what's the difference between the franchisees that become very successful and the franchisees that don't? And let's take territory aside, geographic equations aside, but why are some super successful and some aren't?
It's been an interesting journey for me these last 55 years. And I'm going to tell you, it's very simple, but at the same time, it's hard. It's so simple. It's hard to believe. My job as a franchisor is to give the franchisee the best system, the best recipe in the industry. I've been doing that now. This is my 55th tax season, right? 55 years. So, Tariq, most of my franchisees are your age. They're in their average age is late 30s. Used to be, when I started, it was in the mid 50s and then mid 40s, and now it's in the mid 30s. It's come down over the years. People are becoming self-employed earlier in life. But what I learned is that my job is to give you the system. if I do my job, your job is to follow that system. Well, out of the 5,200 franchisees I brought in, guess how many have followed the system 100%?
How many?
Zippity-doo-dah. No one. So the simple difference between winners and losers, and I've created 1,000 millionaires, but I've also had 1,000 of my 5,200 went out of business. 1,000 became millionaires. The superstars listen 98 or 99%. The failures listen less than 90%. So it's that simple. Why would you, if a famous chef gave you a recipe and you couldn't, and you were a chef, you were a cook or a chef, and you went home and you wanted to replicate that, and he said, put in a cup of sugar. Why would you put in a cup and a half or 2/3 of a cup? I mean, why would you change it? But everyone thinks they know better. It's human nature. Do you have children?
Yeah.
Tariq?
You have 2 kids, 1 and 5, 1 and 4.
Yeah. And do they listen? It's human nature. No one listens. No one listens. And I consider my franchisees like children, and not one of them, even after years and years and years, they won't listen. And I can give you some simple examples of things that make us better that they won't listen to if you like. Maybe you'll understand why they won't listen. Would you like an example?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things we do better than our competitor is our major competitors, and is that during the tax season, there are 4 busy weeks. The tax season is 15 weeks from January 1st to April 15th. But in 4 weeks, we do more than half our business. So it's sort of like, I live in Virginia Beach. We have our seasonal 3 months, right? And this time of year, you can come to Virginia Beach and stay in a $500 night hotel right on the ocean for $80, right? And so you don't need many hours or many rooms available. But so during that time, I love it because the others don't. One of the things you can do to get more customers, to be more convenient, to exceed customers' expectations, is to expand your hours. So I love driving by an H&R Block office at 8:45 in the morning, and especially when these frigid temperatures are across the country, when it was 26 this morning in Virginia Beach when I came to work. I love seeing customers standing outside and taxpayers sitting inside playing on the computer, because they're like a bank and they don't open till 9 a.m. And our franchisees outwork and out hustle and outperform the company employees of H&R Block by opening early. So one of the 10 most important things you can do to increase your business and provide better service that's a differentiator is during those 4 busy weeks to open at 7 a.m. instead of 9 a.m. That's simple. And only 50% of our chain does it. Only 50% does it. So it's simple, but they say things like, well, John, you don't understand. That may work in Virginia Beach, but you don't understand Jacksonville, Florida, or Los Angeles, or Tallahassee. I mean, you don't understand my area. And what I do understand is if one customer comes in during those 12 hours each week that you expand, 2 hours a day times 6 days, it pays for the whole, and many more than one per week come in. And all they have to do is call. They don't even have to come in. They can call at 10 after 7 and ask how much do you charge? What are your hours? And if no one answers the phone, guess what? They call someone else. If they're a new customer, they call someone else. So it's a simple thing, easy to understand, but half of our chain does not do it.
Very, very interesting. And, sometimes there can be 2 people who do the same exact thing, but one person is successful and one person isn't. What's the gray area and what's the difference in that situation?
Well,
that you've seen.
There's many stories to that, but I'll tell you one of my favorite lessons I learned when I was, no, I was younger than you were, but I was younger than 35. But I was at a block district manager meeting in about 1977. And what block used to do is they would have picnics in just before Labor Day to get the preparers families, to get them back into advanced classes and intermediate classes to get ready for the next tax. They'd have the previous year's employees, and picnics back in the 70s cost $2 a person or something, because you grilled out and they were fun. So one guy, we were in a meeting and I learned a valuable lesson. There was about 18 of us. And one guy said, in Springfield, Massachusetts, they hate picnics. They hate picnics. No one likes picnics. I can't get anyone to attend. He had 175 employees and he could only get 3 people to attend. So the rest of us who had successful picnics were throwing ideas out. Like, instead of just mailing them an invitation, do you call them? Do you have fun things like 3-legged races and water balloon tosses and music? And, oh, yeah, I do all that. And so we leave the meeting and go to lunch. And I was very fortunate because he sat at my table. And the first thing he said out of his mouth, I hate picnics. And so then I knew what the problem was. It didn't have anything to do with the 175 employees not liking picnics. He didn't like picnics. So lots of times people are tasked with things they don't like to do. And if you don't like to do it, are you going to do it well or poorly? And so if you have enthusiasm for what you're doing, you're going to do it far better than if you have a hate of what you're doing. And so you have to find the right task for the right person. For example, we're great at guerrilla marketing. And I said this earlier, but we hire special people that have that skill, that like going out in the community. They like drawing attention. They're the kind that would, in a bar, stand up and dance on the table or on the bar, right? Most people are the opposite. They want to sit in the corner and watch those kind of people. So when H&R Block tried to replicate what our great guerrilla marketing, business to business and waivers, and so they decided one year, well, we'll get our office supervisor. They had 9,000 offices, and we'll get our 9,000 office supervisors out in the community and glad handing, and they'll be a lot better than the Liberty people because they're much more experienced and they're much more well-known, but the people hated it. So they did it horribly. And my guerrilla marketers literally ran circles around them because you have to find the person that enjoys it. So if you don't like picnics, hire someone that loves picnics to run your picnic.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And as an introvert that most people think is an extrovert, I can relate to that in many ways. And it makes me think about belief too, just the belief about things, like just believing if something will work, not even if you dislike it, but you see someone else do it and believe, well, that won't work for me, or that works for them because they have this unique skill set or this and that. And I think the role that belief can play is really, really interesting, and how the belief creates, it may hinder you from tapping into a certain amount of your potential or creativity or resourcefulness. And then that shows up in the way you act or don't act, right? Or half-assing something or doing it to the fullest extent, and then getting, the result, which is, it's quite fascinating to me. And I really think it's very interesting. When my wife and I opened up our first franchise, we took out a $300,000 home equity line of credit, back in 2015. And my wife didn't want to do it, but I wanted to get out of financial advising. I was in the investment world. And my mindset was, this has to work. failure is not an option, because I promised my wife, I looked her in the eye, I twisted her arm to get her to sign those HELOC documents with me, and I promised her that we weren't going to fail. So it was interesting because in moments, I remember the visceral feeling in my body of experiencing the I will not fail, and the ideas that came from that emotion of like literally sitting there going like, failure's not an option. Okay. And then all of a sudden my brain would think of an idea, and then I would act on that idea. And it was like those pieces and those steps adding up over time. And to your point of what we were talking about earlier, you know, it's like God blessed you with a gift to have that confidence and that resourcefulness, because some people, and I've experienced this myself in other moments, is doubting so much or doubting myself. And then of course it winds up failing, because the whole time I'm thinking about all the reasons why it won't work. And it becomes this almost self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I can think of lots of beliefs that I see people put on our chat, on our discussion board. And I forget what her example was, but she said she was a failure. And I forget one of the policies that we had recommended. She said on the discussion board, I don't think that will work in my area. Well, I said to myself, what do you mean you don't think? Well, try it. Try it 5 times or 10 times, right? I mean, she said, because of this, I don't think it would be in my area. Well, you have hundreds of franchisees telling you, and John Hewitt and companies telling you this works. How could you decide that I don't think it's going to work? It was kind of probably like the picnic story, right? That I don't like to do that. So I'm convincing myself that that's not going to work in this city.
Mm. So what is that? I'm curious of your perspective on this. What's the role and responsibility of the franchisor in those instances? And I guess it really starts with, you know, bringing on the right franchisees, because potentially bringing in the wrong people that have that either negative mindset or lack of belief or whatever it is. I guess what is the role of responsibility of franchisor versus franchisee?
I wish it was as simple as bringing in the right people, because that'd make my life so much easier. But after bringing in 5,200 people, I can tell you there are dozens, if not hundreds, that I thought would be successful that failed. Mm. And there are dozens or hundreds that I thought would be average or worse and were successful. So I can never read someone's mind and say, are you going to listen 98% or 99%, or are you going to listen 85%? Because everyone tells me I'm going to listen to 100%. Why wouldn't I? I mean, you're the expert. What am I paying money for? You got it all going on. So I wish it was as simple as picking the right people. So I've heard people say that, and that is true, except for I don't know how to do it. I've been doing this for 55 years, and even myself, and I meet virtually every person that comes in. So I get to assess them up front, and I warn them. If I suspect at any point they're going to be a failure, we warn them up front. But the responsibility of a franchisor is, I owe you a assessment of how you're doing. Mm. And so let's say starting from day one, first year, that we give you a list. Essentially, think of it every day during the tax season. On January 1st, you do this. On January 2nd, you do that. On January 3rd, you do this. And every day. We followed up with 2 calls a week, reminding you that this is what and giving you examples of what other franchisees are achieving by what they're doing. And occasionally, rarely, but occasionally, there are things that happen in the United States or Canada that are rare that you can take advantage of right now, or in a certain area of the country. Or, for example, 2 days ago, we announced Walmart W-2s are out. So Walmart can go down, so you need to go give your donuts to Walmart because the employees got their W-2s today. So, I mean, there are things you need to do. So what I owe you is not success. I owe you a evaluation of what you're not doing to be all that you can be. So it's obnoxious when you're failing. It's really obnoxious. But I owe you, and I'm going to tell you, Tariq, you're not expanding your hours. That's going to cost you, you had a budget of doing 200,000 revenue. You're only going to do 175,000 because you're not expanding your hours. So when you're not following the system, my responsibility is to you is to hammer it home. I can't force you to do it. You can choose to fail.
Hey, so if you want to learn the right way to own a money-making franchise without putting your family at risk financially, then check out our free masterclass at franchiseempire.com/masterclass. Let's get back to the episode. Now, one of the things that I had read was in 2017 that your board chose to let you go. What happened in your mind when that happened, and how did you process and handle that adversity, or did you even see it as an adversity?
Oh, it was one of the worst chapters of my life. And it was way more complicated than that, because I had learned a lesson from Jackson Hewitt. I had controlling stock. So my controlling stock allowed me to appoint more directors. So there was 5 directors, myself and 4 others. I got to appoint those 5, and there was only 4 other directors. So it's a long story, but I let them fire me because I could have put my mother and my brother and anyone in there. I could have put you on the board and voted for me. So I let them fire me, and I could have, even if they fire me, I could change the board and hire me right back. So it's a way more complicated story. But there was a civil war, and I used the word eviscerated earlier, and I was eviscerated by my enemies internally. And so there was 16 people of importance in the company, including the 9 directors. And I had 8 on my side, including myself, and 8 against me. And so it was a long, drawn out war. But it was a very black period. And I think the only reason that they carried it out is they thought I would quit. They would pull some stunt and they'd put it in the newspaper. And there was a newspaper reporter that loved going after John Hewitt. And so they would just tear me up to pieces in the media. And then they'd leave, they'd quit, and they'd write a nice story. And so then I got eviscerated. And then next month, another one would leave. And so it was a long, drawn out, complicated story. But my thoughts on was total disappointment that they were ruining the company and going to ruin the company. It was the head of the opposition was venture capital and private equity. And so many times they ruin companies. So I left in 2018. They lost offices every year since then and went bankrupt last year. So I saw them going to...
Liberty Tax went bankrupt?
Yeah, they went bankrupt last July. So they destroyed, they're down to about half the size they were when I left. So I saw that coming, but I ended up leaving, and leaving them to their, and they've destroyed the brand.
Wow. I'm always fascinated with how people deal with adversity and how resilient they are. And just looking at people that have, accomplished more than me in any given area, whether it's business or health, or like I went to start on this new health routine that like only a week in I epically flopped on, and I see folks that can stay disciplined for these sustained periods of times, and It's like, I want to get inside their mind. I want to understand what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing that allows them to kind of push through. And what I think about from that story is that there are so many entrepreneurs that will face an adversity that could, if they let it, could eat them alive. So I'm curious how you dealt with that. What were you telling yourself? What were you saying to yourself? And I mean, you said it was a dark period. How did you get yourself out of it?
Well, first of all, I live by the mantra. My favorite Shakespeare is, "This above all, to thine own self be true." You have to do the right thing, no matter, and you're never going to be appreciated 100%. Let's say that at the peak of Liberty, we had 2,000 franchisees. If I called everyone up and said, "I'm going to send you $10,000 today," can you believe that a third of them would complain? If you were a franchisee, right? If your franchisor called you up and said, "I'm going to send you $10,000 just because,"
I'd be ecstatic.
How could you complain, right? Well, this is what would happen. The lowest performers, they could be new or just not listening, and they're not making any money. And they would say, "That big guy's making $2 million profit a year, and I'm not making anything. Why does he get $10,000 and I should get his $10,000?" And the big guy, so the little guys are complaining because the big guys are getting the same amount as they are, and they need it more. The guy making $2 million does not need $10,000. Now, the guy that makes $2 million is paying royalty of $1 million. And he says, that guy, that loser, is only paying royalty of $5,000. I'm paying $1 million of royalty. If he gets $10,000, I should get $500,000. So you can't make everyone happy. So I learned long ago, you just have to do the right thing. And you just have to do what's in. And the key reason I believe that I've been blessed with so much success, I have 5,200 franchisees. I founded $1 billion company, one of only 1,000 people in the country to do that. And then I founded a $500,000 company. I'm the only person that's founded 2 of the top 100 retail chains in this country. No one else has done it. And I'm on my way, hopefully, third time's a charm, I'm on my way to my 3rd top 100 retail chain. And the number one reason I believe that I've been able to do that is what I always want what's best for the other person. So if you're a franchisee or you're an employee or you're a stockholder, you know what? I want what's best for you. If it's best to sell your stock, to leave as an employee, or to sell your franchise, then God bless you. If it's best for me too, that's wonderful. But I've always wanted what's best for each and every person I deal with. And I think, and I've always tried to do the right thing, but you're never going to get 100% consensus of agreement that yeah, that's the right thing.
Yeah, it's a good point. So now you're the CEO of Loyalty Brands. You guys have, what is it, 9 different brands?
8. We have 8.
8. Okay, 8 different brands. So how did that come across? Like, how did you wind up building that and deciding to become a portfolio?
When I was with Jackson Hewitt for 15 years, I had one brand. And when I was at Liberty for 20 years, I just had one brand. And now we have 8. Well, it sort of happened by accident and blessing that while I was on my non-compete with Liberty, just having drinks with one of my former attorneys that had been attorney at both Jackson Hewitt and Liberty, he said, and he's a franchise attorney, and he had about 35 brands. And he said, I got this one brand that has 15 locations, and they've been in business for 15 years. They can't grow. And every franchise is making 6 figures. It's low cost. And they just can't grow. Why don't you partner with them instead of getting back in the tax business, why don't you partner with them and teach them, mentor them, bring in new franchise development for them, and prosper in that way. And so it was really his idea. So, and we've taken that to 7 more brands since. So we have 8 brands, and it came about. Remember, I told you the blessed I was driving by that Statue of Liberty. I mean, so many times I've been in the right place at the right time, and God works in strange ways.
Yeah, interesting. And so what's interesting to me is I look. Well, actually, what was that brand? That the initial one?
It was called First Choice Business Broker.
Got it. And is that so did you guys rename that now to Loyalty Business Brokers?
Long story. We got a divorce from them and started our own eventually.
Yeah. Interesting. And so what I'm seeing is that you guys are you have some of these franchisors that, act as or have a parent company, right? And then they maybe like Home Franchise Concepts, right? The brand that owns Budget Blinds. They are very specific outside of, I think, one pet franchise. They're pretty much in the home services space. It looks like you guys have a diversity between tax, insurance, staffing, karate, lobster truck. So what's your kind of core philosophy, and what made you create such a diverse portfolio of brands?
Well, my goal when I started when I was almost 70 years old. And so I knew I wasn't going to do this. I wasn't going to be able to handle dozens of brands for dozens of years. So what I thought I would do is acquire a number of different industries that had integrity, that had successful operators that I could help mentor and help develop. And then over a period of 10 years or so, I would get down to 1 or 2 brands. So that was the goal, is to help people. I've always had a passion to help everyone I meet. And so my passion was to help, but eventually narrow it down to 2. And now that I've been doing this for 5 years, I'm beginning to focus more on the 2 core industries, which is pets and taxes. Those 2 are our premium industries. And while I still work with the others and help them, my time will more and more. I have a great staff, and that's why we call it Loyalty Brand. I have 3 people been with me 35 years, 5 people 30 years, 5 people 25 years. So wow. Every one of my brands has help, a lot of help. But my personal time, my personal focus before I turn 80 will be just 1 or 2 brands.
Very cool. Awesome. John, well, thanks for making the time and reaching out. And I learned a lot, and I enjoyed hearing about your story.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Hey, before we go, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please subscribe here on YouTube if you haven't already. And the biggest thank you that you could ever give me is to share this episode with someone who you think will benefit. That means that we can share this message with more people and hopefully positively inspire them like we have you. So thank you. And until next time, go build your empire.